Hello there, YouTube. Devin here again, and today we're gonna do kind of more of a my preference video, and I want to get your guys' feedback on this one, very much, because if you can possibly see the reasoning in this video, everything like that, and kind of interpret to me how which you kind of like to run in your helmet setup and everything like that, I'd very much appreciate it. But today's argument, not really an argument, more of a kind of internal thought process for me, pros and cons of helmet suspensions, helmet liners. So we're totally disregarding the shells and everything. Ballistic protection here is just about load carriage, all right? Helmet load carriage, helmet suspensions today, all right? And what that is the liner in the helmet. What kind of liner is best for what situation. Now, I find myself favoring, ideally, hybrid liners, and we'll get into what a hybrid liner is here. All right, but a hybrid liner is actually more suspension liner than it is pad liner. And we'll get into some of my favorite kind of hybrid liners and my favorite kind of suspension liners and even some pad liners here in this video, and hopefully you guys can kind of see my reasoning for that, and we'll go over some pros and cons of everything. What you see in front of you is a PASGAT, right? It's pretty much stock PASGAT except for the cover on it. It's got a multicam cover on it because multicam is one of the better camouflage patterns. Works pretty well for where I am. It's also a pretty good camouflage pattern everywhere, which is why it's called multicam, but it was actually designed for where I live. It's designed for temperate woodland, all right? That is what multicam is designed to be perfect in, is temperate woodland, and it's designed to be pretty good everywhere else. So, in case you didn't know that. But this is a pretty much standard run-of-the-mill PASGAT. This has a suspension type liner, all right? Now, there's a lot of pros and cons to a suspension type liner compared to a pad type liner. For me, I prefer the suspension liner for where I live, where there's a huge temperature swing. All right, where I live, which is in the northern United States, has a massive temperature swing. Where I live actually gets one of the widest ranges of temperature swing on the planet. Because on average where I live, it gets negative 50 degrees every year and up to over 100. So like 110 to negative 50. That's a 160 degree temperature swing every year. Okay? Pad type liners don't hold up in temperature swings that large. Okay? Especially since you have to constantly maintain and replace them, whereas a suspension liner you don't. Alright? Now, hot weather. Alright? Hot weather. A suspension here. We'll get the pad liner up here too. So here's your kind of standard pad liner for the military. Something very, very close to this is going to be pretty much every pad liner in the military will be something close to the Team Wendy ZAT pad setup. And pretty much everyone else that's not using a pad type setup is using a suspension type setup like the PASGAT. So ACH PASGAT. All right. Now hot weather. All right. Pros to suspension in hot weather, all right? Suspension breathes better in hot weather, all right? Which means it's going to let your sweat evaporate, which is your body's natural cooling mechanism, okay? Now, the suspension doesn't wick the sweat away from your skin, all right? But it does allow it to evaporate, which is how your body cools itself, all right? It also is easily maintainable. You don't need to do anything to it, really. It works well in wet conditions. It dries fast. So jungle conditions, a suspension is a very good type of helmet liner compared to pads because everything like that. It's usually made out of antimicrobial materials. As far as everything else goes, antimicrobial-wise, there's just nylon doesn't grow mold or bacteria, really, and most helmet suspensions are nylon. Pros to the pad system in hot weather. All right, the pads wick. They pull moisture away from your skin, which is good. You want to pull that moisture away from your skin. All right. and they are adjustable, so you can have different versions of, different setups for more airflow or less airflow based on, the temperature swing at night, because most places where it gets hot, like in the desert, it's very hot during the day and colder during the night, and in the jungle it's just usually hot all the time. So the pads also don't work very well wet. They tend to trap moisture, which is what they're designed to do, which can, create rashes and everything else on your skin, everything like that. But these pads are designed to be antimicrobial as well, so you're going to get very little, if any, bacteria growth in these unless you're not changing them regularly. All right, pads are recommended to be changed every 6 months regardless of use. And if you're in like a hot, humid jungle environment where these are getting wet and dirty and sweated in every day, I'd change them more frequently than that, just to be safe. Pad liners are pretty great as far as comfort goes, and as far as adjustability goes, and impact protection. They technically offer more impact absorption than a suspension system. All right, suspension system can be, depending on what type of trauma. All right, now in a ballistic impact, suspension is usually worse. It's going to transfer more damage into your head, all right, because it has way more flex in it. Your head can contact the shell in a hard enough ballistic impact, okay, in a lot of suspension systems. Now, if you fit them right, it shouldn't do that, but a lot of these helmets don't fit everyone just perfect, so it can kind of be an issue like that because they don't custom tailor helmets to everyone's head. So the pad system is going to work better in a ballistic impact, okay? But as far as most impacts go on the battlefield, it's mostly bump. It's banging your head into doorways, it's banging your head into Humvee roofs, it's banging your head into shit, all right? Which, it doesn't really matter. That's 90% of the helmet trauma impacts is, it's the vast majority. It's ungodly high. It's really close to 100%. It's going to be bump. Every day people bumping their heads on stuff, okay? Which, honestly, I'd rather have the suspension and the breathability in a hot weather environment, okay? Now we're going to go to a cold weather environment, okay? Cold weather, I'd rather have a suspension, okay, as well, because you can adjust the suspension out, okay, to make it fit a hat, all right, a winter cap, a bunch of others. You can adjust it to fit that, okay? So it still fits nice on your head. And you can then have the insulation you need, as well as it's not going to change based on the cold, okay? It should still be flexible and everything like that. It should still, move with your head and everything like that, and it shouldn't need time to warm up because there's very little change in here when it's cold. So for me, where that, again, 160-degree temperature change happens, this works way better for me in the winter because I can adjust it to fit a knit cap under it or a wool cap or anything like that. I can fit under the suspension with minutes of adjustment, okay, if that, and be completely warm and battlefield ready, okay? Pad type systems don't adjust. You can't make these thicker or thinner without buying a completely different set of pads, okay? They also tend to get hard when it's cold, okay? They do warm up if you wear it, but the thing is, it's going to be uncomfortable for those first few minutes until they warm up, okay? Now, another problem with the pads in the winter is that they tend to not stick to the Velcro, all right? They can just fall off really easily because they're frozen. They stiffen up, so they don't have that flexibility they need to grip all of the hook-type Velcro discs inside the shell, so they tend to fall off in the winter. Now, some bonuses to these are, without a hat, these are going to be warmer because they're foam. They hold heat. That's what they do, all right? Foam holds heat. That's why we use foam as insulation, all right? So this is going to be warmer if you don't have a hat, all right? It's going to be a lot nicer in the winter once it warms up because then it'll kind of casually mold to your head. But once again, that's going to take time to happen. And again, you still need to replace them. Now, believe it or not, in the winter, people tend to sweat just as much as they do in the winter as in the summer. Now, that's moisture that's going to transfer into your pads, all right? And those pads are going to freeze then because they got moisture in them. They're going to get harder and harder and harder and harder and harder until eventually they're almost just ice. And it's going to take that much longer to warm up and that much longer to acclimate to you, which is another downfall, all right? But it's still going to offer, once it's warmer, it's still going to offer that better ballistic impact protection. All right. Now, I haven't ballistically tested a suspension with a winter hat because the winter hat is technically padding and it could help improve the ballistic protection of the suspension system. But it's still a toss-up to me. I mean, I see the bonuses of both of these, and I tend to lead to where I'm from to this. All right. Now, I was taught this is the right way to do it. Okay. Pad system's the way to go. It's more ballistically effective, all right? But after reading into it, the average person on the battlefield, even on the battlefield, isn't going to need the ballistic protection. You're going to need bump protection, okay? And a suspension system is just as good as that. This is more economical. It's better for a wider temperature range. It's just makes so much more sense. You don't need to maintain it. You don't need to do anything. You might need to replace the leather sweatband every now and then. But other than that, this helmet should be good to run for its entire life. Now, there's still kind of the toss-up, everything like that, and between the two, for which is better. And the pad system can be perfect for somebody that has a pretty consistent temperature range, and is in a pretty dry environment and everything like that, and you're maintaining it properly. It can be better. But for poorer countries with wider temperature swings, countries in extreme environments tend to go for the suspension because it works better for their environment. It's easier to maintain and it's cheaper to maintain. But now these two suspensions have been kind of blended a few times. Now we can get into some of my favorite helmets that actually use what I call a hybrid liner, which is a combination of the suspension and the pads. You can really get the best of both worlds out of your liners. So we'll look at those today here in this video as well. And once again, I'd like to get your guys' opinion on which is better, all right, for where you live, what you run, what you would rather have, what your army uses if you're in a different country. What kind of helmets they use. I'd like to do some reading and some research, and I'd kind of like to take a tally to see where the battlefield tends to be going on what their helmet setup is. So we'll get the first one up here, all right, and that's going to be the Mark 7, okay? The Mark 7 is what I consider a hybrid suspension, all right? It uses pads. It comes standard with front and back leather-covered pads, all right? It comes to standard with this foam liner in it, okay? But it also has a suspension here for breathability. See, it pulls away. You can fit my fingers under there real easy. And it's mesh, so it breathes really well. And then it comes, it can be upgraded with pads that go run alongside the suspension here and ear pads for more stability. But you still get that breathability of the suspension, okay? And that swing of the suspension and everything like that. But in the winter, you can remove some of the pads. You can add some of the pads. They're not standard in the helmet like it is with the ACH, where you can't use the ACH with anything less than the 7 pads that are in it. This, you can take the pads out, okay? And wear it in the winter to be able to adjust for a winter hat. You could adjust this to wear your winter hat. You can add the pads to hold in more heat. You can remove the pads to vent better. You can do lots of other stuff with this helmet. You can tailor this helmet to your environment. Pads are going to help with ballistic impact. They're going to help with stability and everything else like that. But if you don't need that, it's going to do just fine by itself. As far as everyday bump protection goes, you don't need the pads. So that's why I'm considering this the first helmet of the hybrid liner. And now I'm wearing it as how I would wear it, which is just the goggle stored on the right side, because I normally have all the rails and shit and the flashlights hanging off the left side of my helmet. So also I shoulder my rifle to the right because I'm right-handed. So I normally have these facing upwards and backwards. So that way when I'm shouldered or prone or anything like that, shouldered looking down my sights, these are still visible. Whereas back here, they can get hidden by your vest and everything like that. So that's just how I personally preference do everything. And the goggles tend to be lower profile than the flashlights and the rails, which can stick out this far, you know. So hopefully you guys bear with me on that, because a lot of these helmets are going to be set up how I would wear them. So the second helmet we're going to go over that has a hybrid suspension, and it's probably the best epitome of hybrid suspension, is the French F2. Now, I like the French F2 because if you watch the channel for any period of time, you know I like suspensions, and I like the Pazgat. And this is basically a Pazgat with a hybrid suspension, which I think is the best type of suspension. Now, what this is essentially just a Pazgat liner. That's all it is. And then they glue half-inch foam to all the suspension points, okay? Even on the crown, okay? Even on the tails of the crown, you can see the foam there. There's the foam and the crown pad. So this has all the breathability of suspension, okay? All the flexibility of suspension, all the adjustability of suspension, all right? But it's going to have the same ballistic impact protection as a foam liner, which is the best of both worlds. You're going to get that extra protection you need in a high trauma, you know, incident. But you're still going to get all the breathability and adjustability of the suspension. Now, this is a pretty expensive liner to produce, obviously. It's very complicated. But it's still a liner that's in use. The French use these from the late 70s until now. They've changed more to like the Schuberth mesh style and everything like that, and sometimes you could see some French Special Forces using the ACH pads and stuff like that. But this is actually one of my favorite suspension systems. All right, because it's just disregard the chin straps in these two, because we're not talking about that today, which is the better chin strap setup, but we're talking about the suspensions, okay? And this is a great suspension because you get the best of both worlds. So now we'll go into the third type of suspension, probably the one I'm the most familiar with. It's still pretty effective, but it's not as comfortable as these. It's going to offer a lot in the ways of everything. That would be the CG634, all right, which is going to have kind of the same thing going as the French F2 suspension. It's going to have the adjustability of the French F2. It's got the foam pads around the circumference of the sweatband, all right, but behind that even, okay, around the dome, instead of having pads on the dome, you're going to get more breathability and more adjustability without the pads, all right? But then it has this foam, styrofoam, which is kind of a harder foam, but it's still going to crumple, and it's still going to break, and it's still going to, squish down in the event of a ballistic impact, which is good because it's going to offer you more breathability than the F2, more adjustability than the F2, but it's going to offer just as much ballistic protection at a little bit cheaper. You can mold these a lot easier than you can to keep gluing suspension parts together. Now, this is a very, very complicated liner. The Canadians are always pretty complicated as far as their helmets go, but pay no attention to the desert liner on here either. I didn't want to ruin my my Canadian Desert Digital helmet cover, so I have a French F1 drawstring cover, which fits perfectly on this. So the older drawstring covers, I've got a couple of these, and it fits really great on the CG634. Actually, there's very little overlap. It fits very nice, almost perfect, like it was meant to be almost. So it gives it some desert colorification, which is good because I don't want to paint it and ruin this helmet or anything either, but I could still make it blend into the desert better. But this helmet suspension is probably going to be the least effective because the styrofoam is still hard, all right? And this helmet suspension is very complicated, but it's still a hybrid liner. It uses a combination of foam and suspension to create that breathability and that impact protection. This helmet kind of came around the same time as the F2 and everything like that, which is kind of the mid-90s, whatnot, and stuff like that. It started to be introduced and phased out for the steel helmets. Along with the French ones. They're made out of the same material, which is Spectra. The Mark 7 came out pretty late to the game, late 2000s. So late noughties, which would be like, 2005 to 2010. is when it really started becoming phased in and everything like that with the military in England. So, but this is one of my opinions the best suspensions, the hybrid suspensions that you saw in these 3 last helmets I showed you. And I'd like to get your guys' opinion on stuff like this and how you guys feel about what is the best type of helmet liner and everything like that. And you can go super fancy if you want to throw ops core liners in there, if you have your own kind of liners, if you think like leather World War II suspension liners are the best, which they can be, they're pretty great. If you think that there's a specific helmet through history that has the best type of liner, even if you have a helmet that doesn't have a liner and you glued pillows in it, that could be a great liner. I haven't tried that yet, but that's an idea if I ever get a shell and I want to just jury rig something together. But I'd like to get your guys' opinion on these types of, and what you think is the best liner for a helmet. And if you have said helmet, I'd love to see some pictures of it or anything like that. My Facebook is in a couple of the videos in the comments. I've linked it to some people and everything like that. You can find it relatively easy. If you watch my channel, send me a private message on there on the Messenger app on Facebook, and I would love to see the liners of the helmets that your military uses and everything like that, and what makes them so great and everything like that. So thank you so much for watching. I'm sorry I haven't made any videos in a while. Again, I'm still putting together some stuff I think you guys would like for the 200 subscriber giveaway, so expect that here sometime. I'm not going to give you a date because I don't know what the work hours and everything I have, so just bear with me on that stuff. I'm probably going to put out another video today on hopefully a new playlist that I think you guys will like. Once again, thank you so much for watching, and I will see you guys in the next video. Bye.